Hello and welcome to Blardy Blah with me, Tom Feeney.
Me, Dale Harris.
And me, Jack Elliott. Welcome to Blah.
D.
Blah, no. You want to choose it?
And we are joined by Anthony Clavane and just released a new book. In terms of the launch, how successful was the launch day?
Well, there were about 70 people at Waterstones, and it was a packed out crowd of people. I was being interviewed by another author, Dave Simpson, who wrote The Last Champions, about the Leeds team in '92. He also writes for The Guardian, and very successful in the sense that a lot of people there who knew my first book, Promised Land, and came along, out of interest. We then sort of retired to Whitelocks and went to North Bar, and we sort of carried on our discussions into the night and the early hours of the following morning.
How successful do you feel this book has been compared to Promised Land?
Well, it's only been out 2 weeks. And the thing about this is I'm describing it as my kind of difficult second album, which, as you know, I imagine being music fans, I imagine you are, that it's always difficult with the second album if the first album's been quite successful. And Promised Land was successful, much more than people thought. So after 2 weeks, Jack, it's hard to say, apart from I've already had reviews. People say they like it. The London Evening Standard gave it a good review. People are starting to come up to me and say they've enjoyed it, but it's early days, and as they say about a football season, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So after 2 weeks, I don't really know, and I hope, and I'm touching wood here, that it is successful, but you can never tell.
After the success of your first book, did you feel any more pressure when writing and releasing your second book?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I did, and I think that the pressure has been through things like there's a book launch in London next week where I've now got a lot of people coming who are, I suppose you could call them dignitaries. There's Lord Treesman, who used to be chairman of the FA. There are a lot of people from the national media, and I think there is an expectation, maybe expectation is the word, not pressure, that this book will be a good one. And whereas the last one, it took people by surprise. People weren't expecting it to be that good or that interesting, and they all came up, people who said they liked it, they said, we were surprised. And I think it's like in football, using an analogy, when you're a small team playing a big team, there's no pressure on the small team, there's pressure on the big team. So now I feel I've moved a bit from, if you take a recent match, I went to see Leeds-Oxford in the Capital One Cup. I've moved from being kind of like Oxford, who are sort of in the lower leagues, to Leeds, but only in the sense of a championship team. And hopefully this book will catapult me into the Premier League.
In both The Promised Land and your newest book, Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here, you mention anti-Semitism quite a lot.
Yeah.
What do you make of the John Terry case?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that John Terry and, Ashley Cole as well, but John Terry has sort of behaved very badly in the way he's reacted to the FA inquiry. I think the words that were allegedly said by him have not been denied that he said them. I mean, these offensive words, effing Black Sea, I can say that, can't I? He's claiming he repeated them. Anton Ferdinand didn't hear the words, but the point is Anton Ferdinand is denying he said anything to John Terry, which would then make him then say, well, are you saying I called you a effing Black Sea? In other words, the FA have completely disregarded the John Terry defence, which was he was repeating them or he was saying them in a way which wasn't a racist way. So let's take the FA's very long, detailed inquiry. They've completely, I think, undermined John Terry's defence, and therefore he should apologise. Chelsea should discipline him, and I think, like Luis Suarez, he should have been given a much bigger ban instead of just 4 matches. It should mean if Luis Suarez was found guilty of being racist, and he was by the FA, why is it that John Terry's only got a 4-match ban? So it's not anti-Semitism he's being accused of, it's racism. But in my books, particularly the last one, which is Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here, I do talk about anti-Semitism in football and how Jewish footballers had to put up with it. And they had no protection back in the day. I mean, if somebody wanted to be racist or anti-Semitic to you or racially abuse you, you weren't protected. And the referees not only didn't protect you, but in one case, Mark Lazarus in my book was being racially abused and ended up kicking the ball up for a long time, a bit of keepy-uppy, just to sort of taunt the crowd who were abusing him, and he was booked for inciting the crowd. Now that's obviously, one extreme, and then the next extreme is people like John Barnes and Viv Anderson, the pioneers who are black footballers, were really appallingly abused with monkey chants and things like that, banana skins being thrown at them. I think we've come a long way since then, and John Terry and Luis Suarez and people like that, when they are found to have used racist language, they should be absolutely, the book should be thrown at them. And I'm pleased the FA, have punished him, but I think it should have been a stronger punishment.
In terms of racism in football, do you think the problem will ever go away?
Well, I think that your generation, and I presume that you're late teens, early 20s, won't remember, but will have read about or maybe even seen the terrible kind of abuse that during my generation black footballers had to put up with. It hasn't gone away, but we're miles away from that. We're now in a kind of zero tolerance football zone where it's completely unacceptable to use racist language. But having said that, it doesn't mean that people don't think that way. And I think the fact you aren't allowed to use it in a football ground doesn't mean that it doesn't go on outside football. Can I emphasise as well, I've written a book about Jewish involvement in football, but it's a small part of the book, anti-Semitism. It's more about celebrating positively the involvement of Jewish people in football, because they're a minority who have been outsiders and they've managed to get involved. And I think with Promised Land, it's about the Jewish community in Leeds and how they got involved. And just like the Olympics, where you've got a lot of different groups who are involved from culturally diverse backgrounds, and everyone's celebrating Mo Farah and people like that. I think we need to see sport and football particularly as a way of celebrating the differences between us. And I think both of my books are trying to make the point that minorities can make a very positive contribution to sport.
Do you think the FA or the other sporting governing bodies could do more to encourage minorities to get involved in sport?
I think they could, is the short answer to that. I know I've given them some long answers so far, but I think they could, yes.
What do you think about Israel getting the Under-21 European Championships next year?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the thing about that is, I think it's quite a complicated question. It's like, why are you asking me that? Because I've written a book about Jewish involvement in football. Am I a Zionist? No. But I support Israel's right to exist. But I'm not someone who believes in boycotting Israel. Although I completely condemn the Israeli government's policies towards the Palestinians. Therefore, what's my attitude? Well, I'm not in favour of a cultural or sporting boycott of Israel, so therefore why should they not host that tournament? Then you have to look at whether it's going to be dangerous, and I think, yes, there is an element of that. People, however, said it would be a bit dangerous to have the Olympics in London because of what had happened with terrorism. And so, you know, in one way, part of me is sort of saying, well, if you are going to have Israel involved, we have to draw attention to the plight of the Palestinians and the human rights record of Israel. But I don't believe that, you know, people who will protest it and say it shouldn't be in Israel, I don't think they have a strong argument. My book talks about Jewish footballers who've come from Israel, but in writing a book about Jewish